Welcome back, everybody, to Mind, Body, Healing Through the Arts. Today we are very, very fortunate to have one of our very own art therapists who works at the counseling center here at the new school, Kelley Linhardt, who is a licensed art therapist. And she also works in
East New York.
East New York
with
children doing creative arts therapy. And I think you have your own business as well.
Private practice. It's very little being operative right now, but it's building, it's growing.
As is the field of art therapy and the idea of creative arts therapists in private practice. It's a very exciting time for our field. And many other health professionals from all walks of medicine and psychology are also wanting to use the arts in their private practice as well. So I'm sure we'll learn a lot from Kelley today, and we'll also get to learn a lot about ourselves in doing art therapy. So welcome, Kelley.
Thank you,
Thank you for being here.
Thank you all for coming today, despite the fact that it is scorchingly hot. I am really impressed with all of you already, so I think we're going to have a really nice time. We're going to be talking about, and really practically looking at this concept of community building, using visual art making as a way to create, develop, commemorate moments of community with the populations that we work with. What's going to be really cool about this presentation, I hope, is that you're going to see a lot of art made with people from all walks of life, all different levels of functioning. Some of the directives I'm going to show you, you'll see repeated with everyone from a group of low functioning hospitalized schizophrenics to college students here at the new school. And so you'll really see a range of how these concepts of community are so universal that with slight modification they can be applied no matter where you're working or who you're working with. So just to start, I want to thank Louise. I'm Kelley, as she said. I've been an art therapist for 6 years, and I have worked with a lot of different populations. You're going to see work from a variety of institutions, settings. You're going to see work done by normal adolescents, normal groups of high-functioning adults, as well as people who are struggling with dementia, psychosis, all different things. But the general idea is to help people to make artwork that helps them to feel connected to one another. So we'll get started. So again, we're going to see a variety of directives from diverse populations with different levels of pre-existing connectedness. So sometimes these are groups of people who have never met before. How do you create community in these contrived situations where here we are in, a psych ward. This is a group of people who are transient. They're here for a week, 2 weeks, gone. Every group is the first group of this, and it's going to be someone's first group, someone's last group. How do you create community in a situation like that? Versus people who are in these continuing relationships. How do you kind of symbolize and honor their involvement? And we're going to talk about and kind of explore whether the concept of feeling integrated into a supportive community is something that we've been told to look for as therapists, because the kind of community is kind of a buzzword, and we're going to take a look at what that means, try to figure out when we talk about community in a mental health frame, what we're actually talking about, and then we're going to look at it both as a healing phenomena and that has these practical applications. And we are going to really explore the role of the art therapist in this work. Because oftentimes, because of who we are and where we work, we may not be part of the community that we work with. We might be culturally different. We might be a different age, we might be a different ethnicity, we might be a different gender, oftentimes, very often, a different class, social class. So how do you create community when you're not part of one? Are you a facilitator? Are you a witness? When do you actually involve yourself into the community? And we are going to end with some fun artwork. And in our experiential art making, we're going to look at ways to use a single directive and modify it for different populations up until you wonderful group of high-functioning and productive adults who are spending your Wednesday evening here. So this is a little pedantic, but this is the definition of community from Merriam-Webster. And the reason I wanted to put this up is because I really wanted to differentiate this concept of mental health community, like where we're like, we need to create a community on the unit, or we need to create a community, a supportive holding community, from these sort of more pedestrian ideas of what community is. Because most of our populations in the first category of community definitions, everyone can fit into those. And I think that's really helpful for us, because I think sometimes we really have a sense that this is like this ephemeral, impossible thing. But literally, community is just people sharing space together. Like, that's the majority of the definitions. What I think we're looking for in terms of community as therapists is this more emotional quality of being part of something bigger than oneself, being supported, being known, being understood. And that kind of goes into the third line of definitions, where we're talking about specifically the word in 3C, fellowship. And that's what we're going to be looking at and trying to kind of derive out of these art therapy directives. So let's take a moment and really discuss the concept of community and mental health care. Has anyone ever ran a community meeting here? Okay, a couple. And so once, for those who are students, once you get into the world of institutional mental health care, community meetings are everywhere. They are the way the days are started. They might be a monthly occurrence, they might be a daily occurrence, they might be a weekly occurrence. And they actually have been around as a concept since the 1940s. When they started, folks who were institutionalized for severe mental health issues were often put away for a long time. And what the psychologists and psychiatrists on these units would realize is that as much as you could treat the individual, the social element, the communal element of what was going on in the unit affected people's mental health. If it was a really disorganized, really manic unit, the whole community could get enacted into this sort of energetic presentation. We know things about suicide clusters, we know things about human behavior being this affected, obviously, by people around them. And so the community meeting came out of this awareness, and it was the first time where this sort of was this kind of really radical idea of having staff and patients come together and discuss as a unit, everyone who worked on the unit, what's wrong and how do we fix it, and sort of try to collaborate and sort of identify issues before they became something. And to this day, community meetings are nearly universal, but they start to feel very ceremonial and superficial at times, especially when you're in a situation where you have a much decreased length of stay. So people don't know each other in this intimate way. You might have people of very divergent functioning levels that you're working with, who you might have somebody who's depressed because they lost a job. At the same time, you have somebody who has been a chronic disorganized schizophrenic for 20 years. And their needs and their desires from the community are different. They feel disconnected. And also, this original concept of community meeting was this psychotherapeutic concept of creating a healing environment. And when we're working mainly psychopharmacologically, the idea is this is an internal process of getting all our dopamine and our serotonin at the right level so that we can be off, and not thinking about this sort of like meta understanding of how our environment affects our behavior, or vice versa. But as much as it becomes onerous to lead these community meetings. You really get a sense that they're so needed. And with a lot of the groups that we work with, isolation, alienation, marginalization, stigmatization, these are part of their daily lives. And what we would hope for is when they're with people who are going through the same thing as them, there's some kind of normalization or universalization of these feelings. And that's why we hope to create a community wherever we're working. And we also realize that these issues of isolation are not only symptoms of psychopathology, but they're also causes. And so there's this curative property of feeling connected to other people in almost any malady. I mean, even for normal people, if you feel connected to other people, you're probably going to feel a little bit better. So why art therapy as the choice? I first want to just look at group therapy in general. What group therapy can do and what makes it so powerful is that it helps people to sort of have this normalization, universalization of difficult emotions. It provides opportunities for people to feel validated and understood. But it's an ephemeral process, right? So you're in a group, you feel connected, and then the group ends, and you have a memory of it, but it's not a concrete thing. It's like a feeling. But with art therapy, you create an artifact that the group exists. You create a tangible testament memory item that testifies to the fact that not only did we create community by being connected and by sharing this space and by working together, but here it is. And 5 days later, I made this mural on a psych ward. 5 days later, patients look past it and they have this memory of like, okay, I did this with her and him and her and him, and we did this together, and this is what it is. And it's a tangible representation that this connection exists. And so in this work, so much of it, what is most powerful about it is that this persists, that this image not only creates community in the process of making it, but that it persists over time. So I'm talking about directives in group art therapy, and maybe you can tell from my picture of the angry school teacher, but I am a little bit rebellious. I'm sure most people who are artistic have that sense about themselves, and I really generally don't like being told what to do, and I have a big problem a lot of the time with really directive group work. Even in situations where people need structure, I think directives can sometimes be really stifling. So when we're talking about community building, we have to have some kind of container, some kind of formal or contextual or symbolic container to make it happen. Because if people are all doing different things, even if they're in the same space, we're not going to end up with some kind of community symbol. So this is a case where I throw away some of my prejudice and I really embrace directives. But what you'll see is the directives that we use are very broad, very universal, very grounded, and open to interpretation, open to being the rebel and saying, like, I don't like this, I'm going to do it my way. And we own the fact that people are going to need to create in whatever way they need to create. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what would make an effective community building directive. These are all really important, and we'll hit on them as we go through the directives. So this is incredibly important, a low barrier to entry. So as we go through, you'll really see we're going to ask people to do things that are really easy, almost mindlessly easy. We're going to ask people to do things that they feel comfortable with. Because part of the movement of creating a collective art piece is that you have to give something of yourself. That's pretty scary. Like, I'm going to make something and give it up. So we're going to ask them to do something that's so easy and so simple that only when it comes together will it seem like a big deal. We're going to use processes that are clearly described from the outset. Now, when we do this kind of work, there usually is several steps, because if you have this idea of an individual coming into a collective somehow, there's going to be a step of individual creation, a step of collective creation, and probably some kind of like containment or prep work by the therapist, or some kind of closing, tying up by the therapist. So we want to make sure that people on the outset know that they're going to do this, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. there needs to be a very clear conceptualization of what is owned by the community versus what is owned by the artist. So when we're contributing to something larger than ourselves, we need to know what it is that we're giving, what's required of us. The worst thing in the world is to make something that you love and have somebody say, no, actually that's going to the group. And so that's why we keep things very structured and boundaried in the way that we direct the work. The most important community building directives have this as a concept. Each person's individual contribution can stand alone, but the sum is greater than the whole. So everything that somebody adds to this work could be an individual piece. But when it's combined into this group work, whatever it is, it should be magnified by 10. It should glow. It should become something greater. And that's what's going to be reinforcing of this concept, I'm part of something bigger than myself. Have a unifying formal element, container, or structure. Create a symbol for the community, and all the work that you will see creates some kind of community-based symbol. And really importantly, requires a therapist to give something of him or herself as a witness, facilitator, and container. There is nothing here that just happens. This kind of work particularly just involves a lot of prep, a lot of holding, a lot of tying together, but that's kind of the thing that makes the sum greater than the whole, is our witnessing and our work. All right, so I sort of broke down as I looked through my 6 years of doing this kind of work, because this is really my passion, so I have a lot to pull from. I divided into sort of 4 genres of ways to do this, and I'm going to kind of go through them in sort of the path of least resistance to the more complex kind of work. So the least complex, I call it graffiti, which is work where we ask people to invest a part of their individual experience or perspective into a shared space. A little bit more complex would be this concept I call quilting, which is where we have personal artwork that then is sort of tied together or sewn together into a greater whole, but keeps the individual work very clearly delineated. A sort of more complex process would be what I call picking a mascot, which is creating a shared and unifying symbol. So that could come out of the group process, the development of this symbol, or it could be given by the therapist. But it really needs to have sort of a cohesive, like there has to be a level of agreement. This is something that represents all of us. And then the most complex, but probably my favorite way of working is gift exchange, which is where we have people give and receive meaningful and validating objects. All right, so let's talk about graffiti. Here's the groundwork for graffiti. There's an extremely low barrier to entry. We ask almost nothing. To do this work, anyone's defensiveness can be integrated into this work. Whatever you give us, we will take. But because of the extremely low barrier to entry, it requires very structured facilitation by the therapist on the outset and containment during the process. So here's a new school example to get us started. Every year at the convocation, they have a block party. And every year for the last 4 years, I have made what I call, it's kind of like a graffiti canvas. It's a big old thing. You can see in this picture. It's about, usually probably like 4 foot by 3 foot. And I write a prompt, this year I will, and then I put the new school logo. And I have really nice art markers, and I just have people from the community come, write, draw. Some of the contributions are sarcastic, some of them are very sincere, some of them are outlandish, some of them are ridiculous. They're from students, from staff, from faculty, from people on the streets. But what this work does is by creating this structure with this very low barrier to entry. It's no work at all to just write a few words. We end up with this shared community image of, we all have different intentions, but this year we all have an intention, and we are united by starting this process together, starting this school year together, and sharing these feelings. So these canvases go up in the Student Health Center every year, and I really love to look at them because, there's so many people's hopes on things like this, and it's such a simple thing. And I'm sure many of you have worked like this before. Maybe it's New Year's at, wherever you work, and you have a little piece of paper where people can all write down their resolutions for the year or whatever. But there's something really beautiful about creating a unified experience. Like, it's a new school year. I have a plan for it. It's pretty low key. And then suddenly making it, like elevating it by having people take a shared ownership of, or a shared community in that we have these communal intentions. Bringing it up a notch, we're going to quilting. Quilting also has a low barrier to entry, but it takes a little bit more. It really requires a clear delineation of individual contributions. It requires a therapist to provide unified ready-made parts to the community on the outset that can then be organized into a whole afterwards. So this is me as a young art therapy intern. I was working at a preschool in Tribeca with very wealthy children. And this was my first day of work and one of the first days of school. And I was working with kids between the ages of like 18 months and 3. And so in terms of their ability to symbolize, to self-represent, it's pretty low. But they can glue pieces of paper on another piece of paper. And even at that like kind of very low, like concrete level of understanding of the world, having something that you made connected to something that was made by somebody who's sitting right next to you becomes a really potent symbol for community, for connection. Here's another quilt. This is a new school quilt. This is from a few years back for International Education Week. I had just little white squares of cotton, and I invited people to make some kind of symbol of where their education started. So some people did flags, some people did little symbols, some people just wrote the name of where their education started. But the process was of sewing together all these diverse places with this new school swatch that I put at the center. And so even though there's a very low barrier to entry, we're asking high-functioning college students to like literally take 30 seconds to put something on a piece of cloth. Like people would actually be in a lobby, like people would do it on there, like waiting for the elevator on their way to class. And so we have this very low barrier to entry, but the payoff is so grand because you start to see like this representation of this vital community where people are so diverse and have such diverse experiences and diverse paths. But we're all connected into this one identity as being part of the new school community. And that's the work of the planning of the directive is making something really simple and really easy into something really spectacular, the big payoff. This brings us into sort of the third dimension. I'm going to pass this around. This is a literary arts magazine that I made with my homeless ladies when I was working in the shelter system. And actually, when I went to look for this image, I had totally forgotten that there was a quilt on the cover, which is really funny, since we're talking about quilting. But we had been struggling with this concept. The women I was working with have been struggling with this concept of identity because they felt so much they like were owned by the stigmatizing identity of being homeless. So we had started doing this writing exercise of like starting with a prompt I am. And then we made art that also started with the prompt I am. And those are like the metaphoric quilt squares, right? This I am is the container, the structure. And then by literally binding it together into a book, we have all these individual contributions, like individual quilt squares, that become part of something greater, that support each other, that honor each other by existing together. It's not just we all have our own I am, we all are individuals, but we have this shared identity and this shared issue, and that by being able to be in a book together, we become something more than just our own stigmatized identity. We have other people who understand what that's like and can support us. This is actually a staff patient mural done by many people at Kings County Hospital. This is everyone in the community, patients and staff, were asked to make a tree. And so we made this community forest for Creative Arts Therapy Week. And I would dare you, and for those who've taken diagnostic art therapy, to tell the difference between the staff and the patient's trees, because it's impossible. Everyone is traumatized when you work in inpatient psych. But some of the, like you would be wrong 99% of the time if you were trying to guess who was a patient and who was a staff member. But the idea is everyone can draw a tree. And you can draw a tree like with just, like a big circle on a trunk, or you can draw a very beautiful artistic tree, or I think there's a tree with balloons on top of it somewhere on here. But so it's something that's a shared, clear symbol. But when you put it together and when you ask people to share space and actually don't let people segregate, like everyone, I think oftentimes in communities, there's a split between staff and patients. And by having everyone all jumbled up together, we really start to have this visual representation of like, well, we're all together in this. We might look different, we might have different ways of being, but we're all the same at the end of the day, and we're all planted in the same ground. And we're part of something bigger than ourselves. So really, really fruitful metaphor, right? If you want to bring people together. This is another kind of even more abstract way of quilting. This was done during finals week a few years ago at a residence hall. They're just canvases. The only thing that united the canvases was this line of the ground line on the top canvases and the outline of the water. And so each canvas has at least a small portion of something that's shared that they had to keep whole. And the students, this was in like a community room or like a rec room, the TV was on, everyone went and painted in different corners, and after an hour we put it all back together. And with this really simple landscape, people went all different directions with it, but it came together and it fit together, and it is another way that you can just take something really simple and make it into something so big and so unifying. Like, that's a connection. You might not even know this person, and now like you're part of something, this bigger kind of grand thing.
I don't understand how they all connected.
Okay, so
weren't watching each other.
No. So I did a pencil line of just the skyline. You see the hill. So it just was a pencil line that they followed, and then there was a pencil line of the water, and so everybody had at least one pencil line, and they were told to keep that what it is. This is the skyline, the ground line. This is the boundary of the water, and so it would all fit together at the end, but they worked completely separately. It's pretty cool. This is the same idea, actually. This is at another completely healthy population. This is a staff retreat of, I think, International Student Services here at the new school. And they were looking for a way to symbolize how they work together. And we decided that we would do a tree. So in the conversation leading up to people, how they chose their canvases, I had sketched out just the outline of the tree and the branches on these canvases. And people talked about like, well, do I do a lot of outreach? Am I like more reaching out towards the community? Maybe I need the branches, or am I like more the support system? I need to be part of the trunk or the root system. And they really talked metaphorically about their role within this, staff system. And then they also discussed, well, I should have a piece of the tree next to this person because we work so closely together. And they sort of like made it into this puzzle. Again, worked completely separately. And then we put it back together, and they have this giant tree representing their system of interacting as a staff. So this is pretty sophisticated quilting. You definitely wouldn't do something like this with a population that was a little bit more disorganized. But with a higher functioning population, you have given them a way to visually understand how interconnected, how they're part of a single system, and how they're all unique. They're all like whimsical and funny and have different ways of viewing the world, but they all are essential and connected. All right, so this kind of bridges the gap between quilting, which we're finishing up, and picking a mascot, which we're going into. This is a mural I did at a residence hall here at the new school. And this was a process that went on for 8 weeks. So these were students who were living in the same dorm and that they wanted to make a mural. That was sort of their only connected piece before starting this group process. And basically we started just by painting images that felt really relevant to them. And we would every week sort of take images from the group that we felt Joey's scuba diver, we really like that image. Whatever the mural is, we want a scuba diver in it. And we would sort of take these ideas and hold them. And so by the end of the process, before we started the big mural, we had this list of concepts that we wanted in our final mural. We didn't discuss what the symbols meant. We didn't discuss why they were relevant or why they were resonating with the group. But it was we're going to have a bridge. We're going to have a scuba diver. We're going to have primordial ooze. We're going to have some sort of fire. We just knew that we were going to have these things. And so everyone on the last week before we started the mural tried to make an image that took a whole bunch of these themes together. And then we chose the image that felt the most real, something from everybody, and we tacked them together. So you can see these are just cut out individuals' artworks. So they're just tacked together in whatever manner, and that's the quilting. So we have all these different pieces that come together, and all these kids worked on creating this big mural. And so it's quilting in that everyone has a piece that they contribute, but it's symbol formation in that there is no ownership at this point. Everybody owns the scuba diver because everyone's drawn it. Everybody owns the fire and the bridge because everyone's drawn it. And so these were symbols that we didn't even try to understand what they meant until after it was done, but here we go. We have made this image that is completely owned by the group. Nobody owns any part of it. Everyone owns the entirety of it. All right, so picking a mascot, making this sort of shared group symbol. So this requires a minimal amount of group buy-in. This is something that you can't just force people to pick something randomly that doesn't have meaning for them. Because what you're going to have to ask them to do is have a limited delineation of what is theirs. They're kind of coming into a whole that's really unified. The therapist often is needed to help to determine an appropriate symbol. And the symbols sometimes emerge from the group process or sometimes are provided ready-made. So you'll see both cases where I've either given something to the group that hopefully they've accepted based on what we're observing, or that this is just spraying up, fully formed. All right, so this will now be an example of a symbol emerging from the group process. This is something I worked very closely with a wonderful dance movement therapist at this psych ward, and sometimes we'd run a group together. And one thing we loved to do was do these projective scribble drawings. So we would get people moving, get people in their bodies, and they'd come up with some kind of movement for how they were feeling, and then we'd take it, give them a little cray pot, take it to the board, and they would just, whatever it was. And from there, as a therapist, we'd help them to kind of project out a symbol. Oh, well, that kind of looks like a trophy. And so then we finished the mural to sort of pull out these lines that people were seeing a trophy come out of it. And then the question, well, what do we get a trophy for? Creativity. So this is our creativity trophy. This is a group symbol that was completely projective and owned entirely by the group. Everybody helped make that scribble that we found the trophy out of. So, all right, final section, gift exchange. And I'm going to give some really beautiful vignettes. This is the most complex community building work that I'm going to talk about, but it's some of the most beautiful and some of the most meaningful. It definitely requires community buy-in, and it requires structured and clearly delineated community understanding of change and ownership and structure of the activity. We're asking somebody to make something for somebody else. That is huge. Even if you know you're going to get something back, this is a aspect of everything that's beautiful in a fellowship in a community. And it requires a lot of containment and witnessing by the therapist. I'm just going to do some final thoughts, and then we're going to make some artwork ourselves. The first thought is that communities take work. I think that is true of every single thing you've seen here. Communities cannot be forced into existence. If people don't want to do this, you can't be forced to make something that's unifying. They must provide more for the individual than the individual contributes to them to be worthwhile. And they work best when they operate with an organizing and unifying formal structure that is easily understandable and immediately apparent. So in all these cases, we have these images that clearly belong together because of their formal structure. Just like art, communities are paradoxically both ephemeral and everlasting, and that is not a coincidence. And that's it. Thank you, everybody. Any questions? Comments? Ready to make something? This will be a really quick activity. Yes.
Sorry, can you ask?
Oh, my job at the new school?
Oh, should I repeat that? I had never heard of art therapists working in a university setting, so I'm just wondering how that came about.
It's a really cool opportunity, and something that I'm actually presenting on at a conference in Savannah this year. It's something we're a place where we all should be. It is the home, it is the seat of our education, and it's a really beautiful way to work with college students. And the new school just sort of had the insight that it would be something that their students would be interested in. And so I'm here 8 hours a week. And so all of these projects, all these things come out of that time. I run a group, I do an open studio every week, and I do individual work. And then I try to find some time to really bring art as a way to community build, do almost like more student life programming. But it's a place I think, really strongly feel we all should be. Any other questions? Yeah.
Sorry, can you put the mic?
I really enjoyed your presentation, and
Thanks. I just loved just such a range of different things, and I think your topic is so timely for today. There's so much divisiveness, and to be even talking about community and making it happen like this, and it really shows that art is the universal language. It transcends all the cultures, all the diagnoses, and it's just so compelling. It was a great presentation. Thank you.
I think you probably saw there's a tree in each category and in every population. Like, there are some things that are so universal, and no matter whether we feel like we have nothing to connect us to who we're next to, we have these sort of universal symbols that are meaningful to each of us individually, and then we can put them together and just like puzzle pieces and build something that's bigger than ourselves. So it's something that I'm really passionate about. This is going to take 5 minutes, so come over this way. We're going to make a garden. So this will be our community piece. Hopefully everyone's comfortable with the symbol of a flower. People have seen that before. Plants, animals, whatever we need in a garden, we're comfortable. All right, so if I was working with a population that's concrete, so if it was dementia patients or if I was at the ward, psych ward, I might give people pre-cut flowers and have them individually work, paste it on, okay? If I was working at a place where people really needed their space utilized and their space kept separate, you might start on a piece of paper, cut it out, paste it down. But because I'm hoping you guys can tolerate the ambiguity of sharing space. Are you going to get in my personal space? Am I going to get into your personal space? I hope that we can just take this gift that I made for you, this image of land and sky, and find something that you want to add to make our garden strong. And it can be anything you want. There's no rules. Plants, animals, ice cream store, whatever you want. Grab some art materials and make something. Everyone needs to contribute one thing to our garden. I might as well. And feel free to just get in there. Don't be shy. And add some clouds. So hopefully a low barrier to entry, a small amount of effort will get us something beautiful. Has anyone worked like this before? Probably a lot of people have, right? Have worked like this before, had people. Yeah, it's really simplistic, and I think sometimes we don't really take enough time to just give ourselves credit for what we're creating when we do something like this. Amazing garden. Feel free to add more than one thing too. Such a nice area right in the center. Someone's got to get in there. I'm serious. I'm tempted by it.
Do you ever in work with any of your populations that with the ones at the new school, you have some budding artists and
Sure.
Some with the potential to not think of it as art therapy. But do you ever have the opportunity to?
Yeah, I honestly think that art making transgresses I think art making is therapeutic in and of itself. So whether people want to look at it as I'm making art together, or the therapeutic value of it is inherent. So am I understanding your question correctly, I guess? So people are artists, and they also hopefully enjoy creating. Hopefully they get something out of it. Hopefully it's a healing process for them. I would say that anytime we become part of something bigger than ourselves, it's a healing process. We live in a very isolating city sometimes, and I think it's really meaningful, even for really people who are really experienced, to feel very confident, to be able to see their work enmeshed and connected to the work of other people. And it's not just like people passing the street, it's we're all sharing a garden together. We're all in one space. We're all in one frame of mind.
Is there a chance that any of the people we work with could use it as something to be enmeshed like financially or something?
Sure. I mean, I think with different populations, there are different sort of boundaries you want to, have in terms of making art for profit versus making art for self-expression or self-exploration. But I think, it can be both. It can be both and, not either or. Not I'm making art for commercial purposes and I'm making art to feel release and to express myself. I think they can exist at the same time. And so, obviously some of the work is quite gorgeous. So, yeah, if you want to. But again, also this is owned by a group too. Right. So it would be more the individual work they would do. That would be for them. But this is all. But this is all owned by everybody who's had a piece and a place in it. This looks awesome. All right, let's do 30 more seconds, and then we're going to hold it up and take a look at it.
Thank you.
So no matter what the population was, I showed you how I would give ready-mades to lower functioning populations. I'm still giving you the base, right? And so that's my role as the facilitator of the activity. I think having a blank brown piece of butcher block paper and saying make a garden, it's hard to feel like have this sort of like shared reality and this shared sense of, even for people who can imagine and make a garden out of nothing. I think for everyone to be on the same page, giving them this sort of shared reference point is sort of the gift of the therapist, and that's the gift of the base of the community. And even though all I did was that one cloud, like that's still the foundation of the activity. And you guys did all the rest, and it looks nice. Should we hold it up? Yeah. Oops. What do we think? Did you do a good job?
Yeah, it's great.
Beautiful garden. So that's our image for tonight. I hope that was okay that I gave you this one. I started to feel like it was too hot for a garden as I was preparing this, but then I just wanted to go with it.
Is that just coaster paint on here?
It's just tempera. Yeah. Thank you all for sharing space and for coming. Any other questions, comments, final thoughts?
Well, I think it's nice to have something given, as a structure to work on. It's very seductive.
Yeah, it again lowers the barrier of entry, because all barrier to entry for the activity, all you're asked to do is just draw something that hopefully even the most reluctant artist can draw a daisy, or even the most reluctant artist has some kind of idea of what a tree looks like. And so by giving people this common shared space with a very common symbol, we're not asking too much from them. We're not asking more than they can give to the community, and then comes back at them like their flower multiplies. And then there's horses and a stream and lemonade, and my goodness, like your one contribution has multiplied and expanded, and you're part of something bigger than yourself. And yeah, we're all flowers in a garden, right? But yeah, so I always try to keep things very simple, because when you ask people to give something of themselves to something bigger, you want to make sure it's something very effortless to give, something that they can part with very easily. Because otherwise, it becomes a burden, to have to hold up a community on your own. And as a therapist, hopefully we have that ability to give that to somebody else. But we want to give our patients that gift of like, well, we'll hold it for you. We'll get it started. We'll lay the foundation for you, and then you just get your flower up there. Thank you, everyone.